ultimately to have committed massive amount of misconduct. Stephen Bruning at Pittsburgh was a physician who had claimed that he had developed effective treatments for depression in mentally retarded children. And his case was so serious because it impacted medical care for many children who were unable to take care of themselves very well. So that was a very big case. So the summary of the case, and here's you can see the mouse, a mouse. A white mouse was the basis for the research, the first clue that there was research misconduct, because he had, Dr. Good and others had started to question some of his results. He was claiming, and I don't remember the details about what treatment he was using, but he was claiming that he could do skin transplants from a black mouse to a white mouse, and the skin transplant wouldn't be rejected. And so that was a big deal for transplantation research and so forth. So he was called down to Dr. Good's laboratory at the last minute, and in the elevator, he took out a black magic marker and painted that a white mouse with a black patch. And it didn't take very long for that to be discovered by the animal care people, and they washed it off with alcohol, and that was the end of his scientific career. Later on, as they investigated what he had been doing, they found additional misconduct. So painting the mouse became a equivalent at the time of saying research fraud. John Darcy was an MD who worked at Emory University for a number of years, 1974 to 79, and then went to Harvard to work with Eugene Braunwald, who was a very famous cardiologist at Harvard for about 2 years. Someone detected a problem with one of his papers while he was at Harvard in, I think, 1981, and Harvard, this is before ORI, because Harvard's become an exemplary institution in terms of dealing with misconduct today. But in 1981, it was not, and it did what they called an investigation, and found no other problems with Dr. Darcy's research. And they said they had examined data, and this was, so there was a number of complaints and whatever. And I think that a couple people at NIH got involved in this case and made a lot of fuss. And the NIH itself took about 2 years to get an investigation committee together that finally realized that the scope of misconduct was significant. And more importantly, they pointed out that Harvard had misrepresented what they had done in terms of the investigation that they had carried out on Dr. Darcy's research. He was fired, and then over the next several years, many more additional allegations of issues arose, including all of his research at Emory University, going all the way back to his undergraduate days at Notre Dame University. So his career was studded with misconduct. And the Stephen Bruning case occurred a little later. He was a psychologist. At the University of Pittsburgh. He studied the effects of drugs on mentally retarded children. And a complainant, Dr. Sprague, an older, very well-established, well-respected scientist, had great doubts about the accuracy of his claims about the efficacy of these drugs on dealing with depression in these children. And he raised allegations for several years, both at the University of Pittsburgh and at NIH. And it took about 3 or 4 years before finally it was realized that his allegations were correct, and that Dr. then Bruning, when confronted with all the evidence, pled guilty and actually was sentenced to probation for a jail term. So it's the first instance that I know of where scientists might have gone to jail for research misconduct or scientific misconduct. He did not actually go to jail, but his career was ended. He couldn't apply for grants anymore and so forth. Unfortunately, Dr. Sprague, on the first grant application that he had submitted to NIH after this was all over and he had been vindicated, and he'd been a grant holder for many years, had his grant rejected. It was only after he appealed to NIH that they reversed it and said a mistake had been made. So consequences to complainants are part of the reason why ORI exists. A theme of early pre-ORI misconduct, as I've just said, is inadequate investigations by the institutions, poor treatment of complainants, and so forth. These stories led to congressional hearings in the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives in particular. There were several set of hearings starting with Al Gore, President Clinton's vice president, also a Representative Weiss of New York had hearings in 1981, and then Representative John Dingell of Michigan had hearings on the Imani case in 1988. And all those were predicated on the idea that NIH was not spending enough time and attention to the misuse of its funds when misconduct was occurring. Why are those funds being misspent? And of course, it's a very complicated issue. But that congressional pressure eventually led to the Office of Scientific Integrity being created in 1989. That was located in the NIH campus, and I joined OSI in May of 1992. So I've been around for the entire history of ORI, as it shows, and was present when OSI was turned into ORI in 1992. Later that summer, we moved out of the NIH campus. We moved away from NIH administratively because we were dealing with the Gallo case and related cases that had NIH scientists as respondents, and it was considered a possible conflict of interest for ORI to be investigating as an oversight agency, investigating one of its own in its own campus. So although everyone thinks of us as being part of NIH, we're actually not. We're part of the Health and Human Services umbrella. We're parallel to NIH in a way. NIH is part of HHS, but we report to the Secretary of HHS, not to NIH. So we have two divisions. The division I headed for 8 years was the Division of Investigative Oversight. We assist institutions in handling allegations. That's not necessary. Of course, the regulation that governs ORI only requires institutions to notify us of an ongoing matter when they decide to go to an investigation. But because of all the training we provided to institutional officials over the years, they realize how helpful we can be, and they often come to us with allegations and to have us help them with how to handle them. And in many cases, we send allegations to them because we receive, as I said earlier, sometimes 350 or 400 a year, a good number of which we refer back to the institution for further review. Once those institutional reviews have completed, they send all the reports and the evidence to ORI, and we conduct an independent oversight review of those cases in order to make independent ORI findings if deemed appropriate. And the other division, which is just as important in many ways, the Division of Education and Integrity, deals with providing resources and responsible conduct of research education. It takes care of conferences for ORI. It arranges conferences. We have annual and biannual conferences. They now run the boot camps for research integrity officers 2 or 3 times a year. And they do research on what research misconduct is caused by. So it's called Research on Research Integrity, or RRI, which you don't need to remember. But they're pretty busy in many areas. They publish our newsletter, and they run our web page, which is very popular. I think it's easy to navigate, and you probably many of you have actually seen it. So, did I miss this? Let me see here. Yeah, I was going a little crazy here. So, the ORI definition of misconduct really started, and we had a definition in our 1989 regulation, but we didn't have necessarily the same regulation that, for example, NSF had. So the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which is in the White House, met for a number of sessions in 1999 and 2000, and in 2000 issued basically a policy statement in which they defined a federal-wide definition of research misconduct. And that in that policy statement, they also requested that each federal agency dealing with research develop its own policies and procedures to deal with allegations of research misconduct. It took ORI's attorneys and the department 5 years to produce the current regulation that ORI operates under. It's published in the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, at 42 CFR Part 93. So that's our regulation. It's 50 pages long. A lot of it is preamble, and a good deal of it is made up of the process by which administrative hearings are held. But the core of it is still fairly lengthy and specific. And I don't remember, haven't memorized it either, but I know a good deal about it. So the definition of misconduct, as promulgated by OSTP, is that research misconduct is falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results. It does not include honest error or differences of opinion. And that last phrase, differences of opinion, I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've had to deal with complaints on the phone or by email about someone saying that someone's wrong about a paper because his research shows it to be different. Well, that doesn't prove that there's falsification, does it? It just proves there's a difference of opinion. And so we have to say, unless you have more evidence that what was reported is wrong because of falsification or fabrication, then we really can't do much with that complaint. So the specific language in our regulation that helps define these three areas of misconduct is that fabrication is making up data or results and recording them or reporting them. So the important thing to remember is that it's what's in your, if you're recording things inaccurately in your notebook, that's a falsification too. It's not just a matter of reporting it in the literature. It's putting it wrong. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen notebook entries where a printout from a scintillation counter, which is telling you what it found accurately, has numbers written out and handwritten numbers put in instead to make a better result. That's called falsification. Falsification is falsification. I'd say it's falsification in the research record. Falsification is manipulating research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results, such that the research is not accurately represented in the research record. And of course, there's thousands of ways that this could be done. Plagiarism is the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. This definition does create some complications. One of which is that it means that dual publication or self-plagiarism does not fall under this definition of misconduct.